The Barrett M107 kicks like a sledgehammer wrapped in thunder. 50 caliber, 30 pounds of steel and fury. At 2,400 yards, you're not aiming at a target anymore. You're calculating planetary rotation, wind drift, Coriolis effect. The bullet's going to spend nearly 4 seconds in the air, dropping over 70 feet before it finds metal. Most people can't comprehend that distance. Most trained snipers won't attempt it. But Tessa Blackwood wasn't thinking about most people when she settled behind that rifle on the Quantico range. She was thinking about a man who'd been dead for 5 years and a promise she'd made to his ghost. The wind pushed east at 12 miles per hour. The temperature was dropping as the Virginia sun bled toward the horizon, changing air density with every passing minute. Jake Hawthorne stood 3 feet behind her, arms crossed, wearing the kind of expression you only get from holding a record for 10 years. He'd made his name with this shot. Every Marine on this range knew it. Every instructor. The legend of the SEAL who could reach out past half a mile and drop a target most people couldn't see without a telescope. Want to hold a gun? His voice had carried just enough edge to cut through the afternoon air when he'd said it 2 hours earlier. Not mockery exactly. Testing. She'd been pouring drinks at Riley's bar in Arlington for the past 3 years, and somehow her name had come up in his conversation with Boone Collier. Former Sergeant Major. Grizzled. 68 years old and still moved like violence was a language he spoke fluently. Boone had mentioned she could shoot. Jake had laughed. Not cruel, just the kind of laugh that said he'd seen 1,000 people who thought they could shoot. I know how to hold a gun, she'd said, not looking up from the whiskey she was pouring. My grandfather taught me. Yeah. Jake had leaned against the bar, interested now. What did he teach you? Backyard tin cans? Maybe some deer hunting? She'd set the glass down carefully. Looked at him then. Really looked. Navy SEAL. Probably killed more people than she'd served drinks. Probably had every right to his skepticism. But there was something in his voice that made her want to show him exactly how wrong he was. He taught me that wind is a conversation, not a problem. That patience beats speed every time. And that every shot tells you something about yourself if you're paying attention. She'd paused. He also taught me that records are just numbers until someone better comes along. That had gotten his attention. Boone's too. The old Sergeant Major had smiled into his beer, the kind of smile that suggested he knew exactly what was about to happen. Within an hour, they were at Quantico. Within 2, she was lying prone behind the Barrett, making final adjustments to the scope. Now the crosshays settled on a steel target so far downrange it looked like a postage stamp. She controlled her breathing. Slow, measured, her grandfather's voice in her head like it had been yesterday instead of 5 years ago. Don't fight the gun, Tessa. Become part of the system. You, the rifle, the bullet, the target. One continuous line of intention. Her finger found the trigger. The world narrowed to millimeters. She calculated elevation. 27 minutes of angle up. Windage. 3 minutes right. The scope's reticle danced slightly with her heartbeat. She timed it. Between beats. The quiet space where the body almost stops. She pressed. The rifle roared. Recoil slammed into her shoulder like a car crash concentrated into 1 square inch. The muzzle blast kicked up dust in a perfect circle. For 3.8 seconds, the world held its breath. Then the metallic clang echoed across the range, unmistakable and absolute. Dead center. Jake Hawthorne's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Respect. Maybe surprise. He'd held that record for 10 years. Made the shot in Iraq during circumstances nobody talked about, but everyone knew had been under fire, in heat that could melt asphalt, with lives depending on it. He'd earned his legend, and she'd just broken it. Who was your grandfather? His voice had changed. No more testing. This was professional curiosity. The kind of question you ask when you recognize something you didn't expect. She stood, brushing dust from her jeans. Colonel Declan Blackwood. They called him Ghost. The silence that followed was louder than the rifle shot. Boone Collier closed his eyes like he'd just confirmed something he'd suspected. Jake's face went carefully neutral, the way operators do when information reorganizes everything they thought they knew. Ghost Blackwood. Jake said it slowly, tasting the name. The Ghost Blackwood? Operation Anaconda? Tora Bora? The man who made a 2,520-yard shot in Afghanistan that they still teach at sniper school. That's him. I thought he died of a heart attack. That's what they wanted people to think. Tessa's voice came out harder than she intended. He was murdered 5 years ago, and the people who killed him are still walking around free. Jake looked at Boone. The old sergeant major nodded slowly. We need to talk, Boone said. But not hey. Too many years. They drove in silence to a diner 40 minutes outside Quantico. The kind of place with cracked vinyl booze and coffee that tasted like it had been made during the previous administration. Tessa sat across from Jake and Boone, watching them process what she'd just told them. Finally, Jake spoke. Start from the beginning. All of it. So she did. She told them about growing up with her grandfather after her parents died in a car accident when she was 8. About the hours they'd spent on his property in North Carolina, learning to shoot. Not just point and fire, but understand. Ballistics, physics, wind, the mathematics of death delivered from distance. She told them about his stories, carefully edited versions of his time in the military, enough to teach her without traumatizing a kid. About honor, duty, the weight of taking a life and the responsibility that came with it. He retired in 2008, she said. 30 years in the Army, most of it classified. He bought land outside Unhurried National Forest, built a house, lived quiet, taught me everything he knew. She paused, the memory still sharp. I was 23 when he died. September 14th, 2019. They said cardiac arrest, natural causes. But when I cleaned out his house, I found things. Notes, encrypted files on old hard drives, journal entries written in code. What kind of code? Jake asked. Military grid coordinates, distances, bearings. He'd hidden something and left me a map to find it. But the map only made sense if you understood how he thought, how he calculated shots, how he remembered things. She pulled out her phone, showed them a photo of a page from her grandfather's journal. Numbers and letters that looked random to anyone else. It took me 4 years to decode it. 4 years of teaching myself cryptography and military notation and his specific system of marking things. And when I finally understood what he was telling me, I realized why he died. Boone leaned forward. What did he hide? Evidence. From Afghanistan. 2002, Operation Anaconda. She looked directly at Jake. Your stepbrother was there. Garrett Stone. Jake's entire body went rigid. How do you know about Garrett? Because his name was in my grandfather's files. Part of a team. 6 men who stumbled onto something they weren't supposed to see. She took a breath. American defense contractors selling weapons to Taliban fighters. Not just small arms. Anti-aircraft missiles. RPGs, high-grade explosives. They were also moving opium. Millions of dollars worth. Using military transport. Military protection. A whole network designed to prolong the war and profit from both sides. The words hung in the air like smoke. Jake's face had gone pale. Boone's jaw worked like he was chewing glass. The team documented everything. Tessa continued. Photos. Shipping manifests. Financial records. They cloned a laptop hard drive from one of the contractors. Had names. Account numbers. Communication logs. $847 million in fraud and treason. They planned to bring it back. Report it through proper channels. But the contractors found out. And they eliminated the witnesses, Boone said quietly. One by one. Made it look like accidents. Friendly fire. Bad luck. Tessa's voice cracked slightly. Garrett Stone died in a vehicle accident in 2003. Rolled his Humvee on a straight road in clear weather. Marcus Webb took a bullet in a firefight in 2004. Officially friendly fire. Nobody ever identified who fired the shot. Travis York supposedly committed suicide in 2007. Gunshot wound to the head. No note. No history of depression. Ryan Cross died in 2011. Single vehicle rollover. Investigators said he fell asleep at the wheel. Jake's hand had curled into fists on the table. I was told Garrett's death was an accident. Mechanical failure. The investigation cleared everyone. The investigation was controlled by people who wanted it to go away, Tessa said. By 2019, only 2 members of that original team were still alive. My grandfather and Boone. Jake turned to look at the old sergeant major. You knew about this? Not until recently, Boone said. Ghost and I served together in the 90s. Lost touch after he retired. But 2 weeks before he died, he called me. Said if anything happened to him, I should find his granddaughter. Make sure she knew the truth. I thought he was being paranoid. Old soldiers seeing threats and shadows. Then he died and I started looking into it. Started seeing the pattern. Every man from that mission dead. Every single one except me. Why didn't they kill you? Jake asked. I wasn't there. I transferred out 3 months before Anaconda. But I knew the team. Knew Ghost. When he called me, he said something I didn't understand at the time. He said, Boone, if I'm gone, the shot that matters is 2,520. Tell her that. She'll understand. Boone looked at Tessa. Did you? Eventually. Tessa pulled out a map, unfolded it on the table. Unhurried National Forest. Grid coordinates marked in her grandfather's handwriting. 2,520 yards was his record shot. The one that made him a legend. He made it in Afghanistan, 2003. But the number meant more to him than just distance. It was a code. A marker. When I combined it with other information in his journal, especially the bearing based on my birthday, I figured out where he buried the hard drive. Jake studied the map. That's federal land. Protected. He couldn't just dig a hole and bury something. He didn't dig. There's an old fire tower in that section of the forest. Decommissioned in 1998. He hid the drive in the structure. Waterproof case. Sealed. Waiting. She met Jake's eyes. And now the people who killed your stepbrother and my grandfather know I'm looking for it. How do they know? Because I've been asking questions. Filing Freedom of Information Act requests. Talking to veterans from that unit. Digging through records. I was careful, but not careful enough. 2 weeks ago, someone broke into my apartment. Didn't take anything. Just left a message on my mirror. Stop looking backward. I knew then that I was close. That I'd stirred something up they wanted to stay buried. Jake was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 10 years of unanswered questions. Garrett was my stepbrother, but we were close. Real close. When he died, they told us it was an accident. Gave him a service with full honors. Flag on the coffin. 21-gun salute. My stepmother never recovered. Died 6 years later. Cancer, officially. But I think she died of a broken heart. He looked up. If what you're saying is true, if Garrett was murdered because he tried to do the right thing, then I need to know who gave the order. And I need them to answer for it. That's why I broke your record today, Tessa said. I needed to get your attention. Boone said you were the best operator he knew. Said you had resources. Connections. That if anyone could help me get justice for these men, it was you. But I needed you to take me seriously. Needed you to see I wasn't just some angry kid with a conspiracy theory. So I learned to shoot the way my grandfather did. Spent every free hour for the past year practicing. Studying ballistics. Understanding wind. Becoming good enough that you'd listen. Jake smiled, but there was no humor in it. You got my attention. Now what? Now we get that hard drive. We find out exactly who was involved. And we make sure the truth comes out. Tessa's voice was steel-wrapped in determination. My grandfather spent the last decade of his life protecting that evidence because he knew if it disappeared, those men died for nothing. Garrett, Marcus, Travis, Ryan, they saw something evil and tried to stop it. They deserve better than unmarked graves and classified reports nobody will ever read. Boone pulled out a folder, slid it across the table. I've been doing my own digging. The company involved was Vanguard Solutions. Defense contractor. Private security. They had a contract worth $200 million during the early stages of the Afghanistan war. CEO is a man named Sterling Kane. Billionaire now. Owns 3 companies. Has friends in Congress. Donates to campaigns on both sides of the aisle. Untouchable. Nobody's untouchable, Jake said quietly. He is if we don't have proof. And right now, the only proof is on that hard drive. Boone tapped the map, which means we need to get to it before Kane's people do. If they find it first, it disappears forever. And so do we, probably. Tessa felt the weight of it settle on her shoulders. 5 years of searching. 4 years of decoding. Months of preparation. All of it leading to this moment. 3 people in a diner planning to take down a billionaire with enough power to kill witnesses and bury investigations. "When do we go?" she asked. "Tonight," Jake said. "If they are watching you, they know you're close. Every hour we wait is an hour they're moving their pieces. We go now, fast, and we hope we're ahead of them. And if we're not?" Tessa asked. Jake's expression was the one he probably wore before every mission. Calm, focused, already 3 steps ahead. Then we improvise, adapt, overcome. Standard operating procedure. They left the diner separately. Tessa drove back to her apartment, packed a bag with the kind of efficiency her grandfather had taught her. Minimal gear, maximum utility, hiking boots, dark clothes, tactical flashlight, first aid kit. The Glock 19 she'd bought 3 years ago and trained with religiously. She looked at herself in the mirror. 28 years old. Bartender. Orphan. Granddaughter of a legend she was only beginning to understand. Her phone buzzed. "Jake. Meet at the trailhead. Oh, 200 hours. Come ready." She texted back a single word. "Roger." At 1 in the morning, she drove south toward North Carolina. The roads were empty. Darkness pressed against the windows like something solid. She thought about her grandfather, about the last conversation they'd had. He'd been sitting on his porch, drinking coffee, watching the sun come up over the property. She'd asked him if he had regrets. About the military, about the things he'd done. He'd been quiet for a long time. Then he'd said, "I regret every life I took, even the ones that needed taking. But I don't regret standing for something. Doing what I believed was right even when it cost me." The hardest shots aren't the ones at distance, Tessa. They're the ones where you have to decide if pulling the trigger makes you a killer or protector, where you have to live with the consequences either way. She understood now. He'd been preparing her, not just teaching her to shoot, but teaching her to carry the weight that came with it. The moral calculus, the acceptance that some things were worth fighting for even if it destroyed you. The trailhead parking lot was empty when she arrived. She pulled her truck into the shadows under a stand of pines and waited. At exactly 0200, headlights appeared. Jake's vehicle, then another. Boone. They parked and met in the center of the lot, speaking in low voices. "We hike in 3 miles. The tower's on high ground. Good visibility, which means they'll see us coming if they're already there." Jake had a tactical pack, rifle case, and the kind of gear that suggested he did this professionally. "Tessa, you're on point. It's your grandfather's map. Boone and I are backup. Anything goes wrong, you run. Don't try to be a hero. Just get out and make noise. Enough noise that people start asking questions. What about you two?" "We old hands at bad situations," Boone said. "We'll manage." They moved into the forest. No flashlights. Just moonlight filtering through the canopy and the kind of night vision that comes from years of operating in the dark. Tessa led, following the map in her head. The terrain was familiar. She'd hiked this area a dozen times in the past 6 months, scouting, memorizing, making sure she could find the tower even in total darkness. The forest was alive with sound. Wind through leaves, something small moving through underbrush, an owl calling in the distance. Tessa's breathing settled into the rhythm her grandfather had taught her. Slow, controlled, heartbeat steady. She moved like he'd shown her, heel to toe, weight distributed, silent. Behind her, Jake and Boone moved like ghosts. Professionals, men who'd spent decades learning how to exist in hostile environments without advertising their presence. She felt safer knowing they were there, but also more aware of how serious this was. These weren't men who spooked easily. If they were treating this like a combat operation, it was because the threat was real. They'd been hiking for 90 minutes when Tessa held up a fist. "Stop!" Jake and Boone froze. She pointed ahead, through the trees, barely visible against the night sky. The fire tower rose like a skeletal finger, 50 feet tall, steel frame, wooden platform at the top. Decommissioned, forgotten, perfect. But something was wrong. She could feel it. The forest was too quiet. The natural sounds had died away. That happened when predators were near. When something dangerous moved through the environment and every living thing went still. hoping to avoid notice. Jake moved up beside her, whispered directly into her ear. "You feel it?" She nodded. "We're not alone. Could be animals. Could be people. Either way, we proceed carefully. I'll take point. You and Boone stay behind me. I see anything hostile, I handle it. You two get to the tower, get the drive, and get out. Understood?" "Jake." "Understood." His voice carried command weight, the kind you didn't argue with. "Understood." They moved forward. Slower now. Jake had his rifle up, scanning. Thermal scope. Military grade. Tessa saw him pause, check something, then continue. They were 50 yards from the tower when he dropped to one knee and raised his fist again. Full stop. Then she saw them. Shapes moving in the darkness. At least 4, maybe more, spread out around the tower. Professional positioning. Overlapping fields of fire. These weren't hikers who'd stumbled onto the location. These were operators. Contractors. The kind of men Vanguard Solutions employed. Jake backed up slowly until he was beside Tessa and Boone again. "We've got company. 4 visible. Probably more I can't see. They are set up in a defensive perimeter around the tower, which means they knew we were coming." "How?" Tessa whispered. "Doesn't matter. What matters is they're between us and what we came for." Jake checked his rifle. "I can neutralize them, but it'll be loud. The moment I fire, this whole forest wakes up. Rangers, local police. We'll have maybe 20 minutes before this area is crawling with law enforcement." "Can we go around? Wait them out?" Boone asked. "If we wait, reinforcements arrive. If we go around, we risk getting pinned in a crossfire. Our best option is fast and violent. Hit them before they know we're here. Secure the tower. Get the drive. Extract before the cavalry shows up." Tessa's mind raced. This was what her grandfather had feared. What he'd spent his last years preparing for. The evidence was so damaging that powerful people would kill to protect it. And now those people were here, in the dark, waiting. "There's another option," she said quietly. Both men looked at her. "I go in alone. Unarmed. Hands up. Tell them I just want to talk." "Absolutely not," Jake said. "Think about it. They don't want attention. Gunfire brings attention. But if I walk in, surrender, maybe I can negotiate. Buy time." "Negotiate with what?" "They want that hard drive. You walk in empty-handed, they'll grab you and disappear you. Nobody will ever find your body. Not if you're watching. Not if you're ready to take the shot if things go bad." Tessa looked at Jake. "You said you can neutralize them. So neutralize them if I give you the signal. But let me try this first. My grandfather taught me that patience beats speed. That sometimes the best shot is the one you don't take until you understand everything in the equation." Jake looked at Boone. The old sergeant major's face was unreadable. Finally, he spoke. "It's her call. Her grandfather. How evidence? We just back up." "Bad idea," Jake said. But he was already moving into position. "You get 30 seconds. If I don't like what I see, I'm pulling you out whether you signal or not. And the signal is you drop to the ground. Flat. Immediately. Then I light them up. Clay. Clay." Tessa handed her pistol to Boone, raised her hands above her head, and walked out of the tree line toward the fire tower. She'd taken maybe 10 steps when lights hit her. Blinding. Tactical flashlights from multiple directions. She stopped, kept her hands high, didn't move. "That's far enough." The voice came from ahead. Male. Calm. Professional. "Turn around slowly. Let me see your back." She turned, completed a full circle, showed she was unarmed. "Walk forward. Slowly. Any sudden moves, you get dropped." She walked, each step measured, heart pounding but breathing controlled. Her grandfather's voice in her head. "Fear is information, Tessa. It tells you the stakes are real. But don't let it control you. Channel it. Use it." When she was 20 feet from the tower, the voice spoke again. "That's good. Stop there. Kneel down. Hands behind your head. Interlock your fingers." She knelt. The ground was cold and damp. She interlocked her fingers behind her head and waited. Footsteps approached from behind. Someone patted her down efficiently. Professional search. Found nothing because there was nothing to find. The hands withdrew. "Stand up. Slowly." She stood. The lights dropped slightly, no longer directly in her eyes. She could see now. 6 men, not 4, all carrying rifles, all wearing tactical gear that didn't have any identifying patches or markings. Private contractors, the kind who operated in gray areas where laws were suggestions and accountability was negotiable. One of them stepped forward, older than the others, 50s maybe, gray at the temples, the kind of face that had seen violence and stopped being impressed by it decades ago. He studied her for a long moment. Tessa Blackwood, you've been causing problems. I've been asking questions. That's not illegal. Depends on the questions. Depends on who you're asking. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You're here for the hard drive. The evidence your grandfather stole. He didn't steal it. He preserved it. There's a difference. Not to the people who want it gone. The man gestured to the tower. It's not here, by the way. We've already searched. Took us 3 hours, but we found it. Hidden inside the support beam. Clever. Your grandfather was a smart man, but not smart enough. Tessa felt her stomach drop. They had it. The evidence. 20 years of protection. 5 years of searching. All for nothing. So what now? She asked. You kill me? Make it look like an accident. Add me to the list of people who knew too much. That's one option. The man stepped closer. Or we could make a deal. You walk away. Forget this ever happened. Go back to your life. 10 bar. Find a nice guy. Get married. Have kids. Live long and boring. In exchange, we don't add your name to that list you mentioned. And justice for the men who died? For my grandfather? For Garrett Stone and the others? Justice is expensive. Complicated. Messy. Sometimes the smart play is to accept that the world isn't fair and move on. Tessa looked at him, at the men behind him, at the tower rising into the darkness. She thought about her grandfather, about the hours they'd spent together, the lessons, the stories, the code he'd lived by even when it cost him everything. My grandfather taught me something, she said quietly. He taught me that the hardest shots aren't about distance. They're about deciding what you're willing to live with, what you can carry, and what you can't. She paused. I can't carry walking away. Can't carry knowing what happened and doing nothing. So no deal. The man sighed. That's unfortunate. For you especially. He raised his hand, about to give a signal. Tessa dropped. The night exploded. Jake's first shot took the man in front of her in the chest. Sent a mass. He dropped like someone had cut his strings. The second shot hit a contractor to the left. The third caught one reaching for his rifle. Boone's fire opened up from another angle. Precise. Devastating. Years of experience translated into lethal accuracy. The contractors scattered. Training took over. They dove for cover, returned fire toward Jake's muzzle flashes. But they were caught in a crossfire. Boone from one side, Jake from another. Tessa flat on the ground in the middle, hands over her head, making herself as small as possible. The firefight lasted maybe 20 seconds. It felt like hours. Then silence, ringing in her ears. Smell of gunpowder thick in the air. She lifted her head carefully. 4 contractors down, 2 running into the forest. Jake emerged from the tree line, rifle up, scanning for threats. Boone came from the other direction, moving like he was 30 instead of 68. You okay? Jake asked, helping her up. Yeah, scared, but okay. Good. We've got maybe 10 minutes before every law enforcement agency within 50 miles descends on this location. We need to move. They said they already found the drive. That it's not here. Jake smiled grimly. They lied. Classic misdirection. Make you think it's over so you give up or panic. But if they'd actually found it, they wouldn't still be here. They'd be gone. He moved to the tower, started climbing. Cover me. Anyone comes out of those trees who isn't us. Shoot first and apologize never. Tessa picked up a rifle from one of the downed contractors. Felt the weight of it. The reality. She'd just been in a firefight. People were dead. More might be coming. This was real. As real as anything in her life had ever been. Jake reached the platform at the top of the tower. She watched him work, pulling out a flashlight, examining the structure. He moved with purpose, checking each support beam methodically. Then he stopped, pulled out a knife, started prying at something. 30 seconds later, he descended with a waterproof case in his hand. Black. Military grade. Sealed tight. Got it. Sirens in the distance. Faint but getting louder. Time to go. They ran. Not toward the parking lot. That would be the first place anyone would look. Instead, Jake led them deeper into the forest, following a route he'd apparently planned ahead of time. They moved fast, sacrificing stealth for speed. Behind them, the sirens grew louder. Flashlights began sweeping the trees near the tower. They hiked for 2 miles before Jake called a halt. They were at a secondary extraction point, a dirt road barely wide enough for one vehicle. Jake pulled out a phone, made a call. Spoke in code. Ended it. Ride's coming. 20 minutes. We wait here. They waited in silence. Tessa's hands were shaking now. Adrenaline crash. The reality of what had just happened settling in. People had died tonight. She'd been part of it. Not directly. She hadn't pulled a trigger. But she'd been there. In the middle of it. Boone put a hand on her shoulder. First time. She nodded. It doesn't get easier. Anyone who says it does is lying or broken. But you did good. Kept your head. Followed the plan. Survived. That's what matters. Those men were trying to kill you. To bury the truth. To protect evil people who profit from suffering. You didn't start this. Your grandfather didn't start this. The men on that team didn't start this. They just refused to look away when they saw something wrong. Sometimes that's all it takes to become a target. And sometimes the only way to survive is to be more dangerous than the people hunting you. A vehicle appeared. Unmarked van. Driver didn't say a word. They climbed in. The van pulled away into the night, taking back roads and routes that avoided any major intersections or traffic cameras. An hour later, they were in a safe house Jake had arranged. Small apartment. Clean. Secure. Jake set the waterproof case on the table. Looked at Tessa. This is yours. Your grandfather's legacy. You want to open it. She did. Hand steady now. Purpose overriding fear. The case opened with a hiss of equalized pressure. Inside, wrapped in protective material, was a hard drive. Small, ordinary looking, but containing information that had gotten at least 6 men killed and who knew how many others silenced. Jake plugged it into a laptop with aDared security. No internet connection. No way for anyone to track what they were accessing. The drive required a password. Tessa thought for a moment, then typed a series of numbers. Her birthday. The distance of her grandfather's record shot. The year he retired. Combined in a pattern only someone who knew him would understand. The drive unlocked. Files appeared. Thousands of them. Photos. Documents. Financial records. Communication logs. Video footage. 20 years of evidence, meticulously organized. Her grandfather hadn't just grabbed random data. He'd built a case, cross-referenced everything, created a narrative that would be impossible to dismiss or explain away. Jake scrolled through it. His face got harder with each file he opened. This is everything. Names, dates, shipping routes, bank accounts. There are senators on here, Pentagon officials, corporate executives. This isn't just Vanguard Solutions. This is a network, a system, people who've been profiting from war for 2 decades. Can we use it? Tessa asked. Can we actually bring them down? If we're smart, if we're careful, and if we understand that the moment we release this, we become targets for the rest of our lives. Jake looked at her. Are you ready for that? Because there's no going back. Once this goes public, everyone on this list will want you dead. You'll never be safe, never be anonymous. You'll spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder. Tessa thought about her grandfather, about the choice he'd made, to protect this evidence even though it cost him his friends, his freedom, eventually his life. He could have destroyed it, could have walked away, but he'd chosen to carry the weight because someone had to. Because if everyone looked away, evil won by default. I'm ready, she said. Then we do this right. We make copies. Lots of them. We distribute them to journalists, law enforcement agencies we can trust, congressional investigators. We create redundancy so that even if they get to us, the information survives. We build a dead man switch. Any of us die unexpectedly. Everything gets released automatically. We make it so expensive to silence us that it's cheaper to let us live. And then we wait. Let the system work. It'll be slow. Investigations take years. Trials even longer. A lot of people will lawyer up. Some will cut deals. Others will flee the country. But the truth will be out there. And that's what your grandfather wanted. Not revenge. Just truth. So that the men who died for it didn't die for nothing. Over the next 2 weeks, they executed the plan. Jake used his contacts to reach journalists at major outlets. Boone coordinated with veterans organizations and congressional staffers who'd been pushing for defense contractor accountability. Tessa managed the technical side, creating encrypted copies, setting up dead man switches, building the kind of redundancy that would make the evidence impossible to suppress. The story broke on a Tuesday morning. Front page. Multiple outlets simultaneously. Massive defense contractor fraud uncovered. Evidence shows decades of corruption, war profiteering, and cover-ups. The names started coming out. Executives, politicians, military officials. Some resigned immediately. Others denied everything. But the evidence was overwhelming. Photos of weapons transfers, videos of meetings, financial records showing money flowing to offshore accounts. Sterling Kane, CEO of Vanguard Solutions, held a press conference, denied all allegations, threatened lawsuits, claimed the evidence was fabricated by disgruntled employees and conspiracy theorists. But his stock price dropped 40% in 3 days. Congressional hearings were scheduled. The Justice Department opened an investigation, and Tessa Blackwood became famous. The granddaughter who'd risked everything to honor her grandfather's legacy. The bartender who'd broken a Navy SEAL's shooting record and taken down a billionaire in the same week. Media outlets wanted interviews. Book publishers offered deals. Hollywood called about movie rights. She turned them all down. That wasn't why she'd done this. She didn't want fame. Didn't want to be a celebrity or a symbol. She just wanted the truth out there. Wanted the men who died to be remembered for who they were. Soldiers who tried to do the right thing and paid the ultimate price for it. 3 months after the story broke, she received a letter. No return address. Postmarked from somewhere in the Cayman Islands. She opened it carefully, aware that it could be a threat. Or worse, it was handwritten. Elegant script. Brief. You've made your point. The evidence is public. Nothing can change that now. But understand this. You've declared war on people who don't forgive and don't forget. I offered you a way out. You refused. That was your choice. Live with the consequences. If you're smart, you'll watch your back for the rest of your life. Because we're patient. And eventually, everyone makes a mistake. S.K. Sterling Kane. Even with everything crumbling around him, even facing congressional investigations and criminal charges, he'd taken the time to send a threat. To remind her that powerful people held grudges. She showed the letter to Jake and Boone. They read it in silence. "Is not wrong," Jake said finally. "They'll come after us eventually. Maybe not tomorrow. Maybe not this year. But they will. That's the price." "So what do we do?" Tessa asked. "We live. Carefully. We watch each other's backs. We maintain the dead man switches so they know hitting us is pointless. And we understand that we traded one kind of life for another. We'll never be normal again. But we'll be able to look ourselves in the mirror. That's worth something." Boone nodded. "Your grandfather lived with this weight for 15 years. Never complained. Never broke. He taught you well, Tessa, better than you probably realize. You've got the skills. Got the mindset. Now you just need the patience. Because this fight isn't over. It's just beginning." The congressional hearing room smelled like furniture polish and desperation. C-SPAN cameras lined the back wall, capturing every moment for posterity. Tessa sat in the gallery, watching Sterling Kane take his seat at the witness table. He looked exactly like a billionaire facing federal investigation should look. Expensive suit, power tie, lawyer on each side whispering in his ears. Confident, untouchable, the kind of man who'd spent 50 years learning that money and influence could solve any problem. Senator Patricia Chen, chairwoman of the Armed Services Oversight Committee, adjusted her microphone. "Mr. Kane, thank you for appearing today. Though I should note that you were subpoenaed, so the gratitude is somewhat obligatory." A few chuckles rippled through the room. "We're here to discuss Vanguard Solutions contracts during Operation Enduring Freedom," specifically the period between 2002 and 2008. Evidence has emerged suggesting systemic fraud, illegal weapons trafficking, and conspiracy to prolong military operations for profit. Do you understand the seriousness of these allegations? Kane leaned forward slightly. His voice was smooth. Practiced. Senator, I understand that serious allegations have been made. I also understand that evidence can be misinterpreted, taken out of context, or in some cases fabricated entirely. Vanguard Solutions has served this nation faithfully for 3 decades. We've protected American interests in hostile territories. We've saved lives, and we've done so while maintaining the highest ethical standards. These accusations are baseless attacks from individuals with personal vendettas and political agendas. Personal vendettas. Senator Chen's voice carried an edge now. Are you referring to Colonel Declan Blackwood and the 5 other service members who documented your company's activities? The ones who are all conveniently dead. Tragic losses. Each one. But correlation isn't causation. Senator, military service is dangerous. Accidents happen. To suggest that Vanguard Solutions had anything to do with those deaths is not only offensive, it's libelous. Tessa's hands clenched in her lap. Jake sat beside her, watching Kane with the kind of focus a predator reserves for prey. Boone was on her other side, his face carved from stone. They'd known this would be hard, known that men like Kane didn't get where they were by being easy to take down. But watching him deny everything, watching him turn her grandfather into a conspiracy theorist and the dead men into unfortunate statistics, made her want to scream. Senator Chen wasn't finished. Let's talk specifics. This committee has reviewed financial records showing $847 million in irregular transactions. Wire transfers to shell companies in the Cayman Islands, Cyprus, and Dubai. Shipping manifests showing weapons deliveries to regions with no authorized recipients. Communication logs between your employees and known Taliban operatives. How do you explain these documents? I don't explain fabrications, Senator. Those documents were allegedly obtained through illegal means by individuals with no authorization to access classified information. The chain of custody is broken. The authentication is questionable. Any first-year law student could have them thrown out of court. Then you welcome a full criminal investigation. You'll cooperate completely with federal prosecutors. Kane smiled. My lawyers have advised me to invoke my Fifth Amendment rights regarding any criminal matters. I'm here today as a courtesy to this committee and out of respect for the oversight process. But I will not participate in a witch hunt designed to destroy a company that has served this nation honorably. The hearing continued for 6 hours. Senators asked questions. Kane deflected, denied, or invoked the Fifth Amendment. His lawyers interjected constantly. By the end, Tessa felt exhausted. They presented overwhelming evidence. They'd exposed a criminal conspiracy, and Kane had walked out of the building surrounded by reporters, smiling, confident, promising lawsuits against everyone involved in what he called the smear campaign. Outside the Capitol building, Jake, Boone, and Tessa stood in the afternoon sun. Tourists walked past, taking photos. Protesters held signs about various causes. Democracy in action, or the appearance of it anyway. That was a disaster, Tessa said. That was step 1, Jake corrected. You don't take down empires in a day. You chip away. Death by 1,000 cuts. Today was cut number 1. There'll be more. Federal investigations. Civil lawsuits. Criminal charges. Some will stick. Some won't. But each one costs him money, reputation, influence. Eventually, the weight becomes too much to carry. And how long does that take? Years. Maybe decades. Justice doesn't move at the speed of revenge. It moves at the speed of bureaucracy, legal process, and political will, which is glacially slow. Jake looked at her. You thought this would be different? That you'd present evidence and bad guys would go to jail and credits would roll. I thought the truth would matter more than this. The truth always matters, but it's rarely enough by itself. You need persistence. You need people willing to keep pushing even when it looks hopeless. You need to become what your grandfather was, patient, stubborn, and absolutely refusing to let the corruption win. Jake put a hand on her shoulder. He fought this for 15 years. died protecting the evidence. That's the standard. That's what honor looks like in real time. Not a quick victory. A long, exhausting commitment to doing what's right even when nobody's watching and nothing seems to change. Boone spoke up. Meanwhile, we've got a more immediate problem. Kane just spent 6 hours on national television. He knows his company is dying. Stock price in free fall. Government contracts being reviewed. Criminal investigation underway. He's a cornered animal, and cornered animals are the most dangerous kind. You think he'll come after us? I think he already has people planning it. The question is when and how. We need to be ready. They were ready. As ready as 3 people could be against a billionaire with resources and connections. They'd set up the dead man's switches. Digital insurance. If any of them died or disappeared, the entire evidence archive would be automatically released to 50 different media outlets, law enforcement agencies, and congressional offices. It was mutually assured destruction. Kane couldn't touch them without triggering a data avalanche that would bury him completely. Theoretically, Tessa went back to work at Riley's bar. Her boss had been understanding about the time off, probably because the publicity had brought in curious customers. People wanted to see the woman who'd broken the SEAL sniper record and expose a defense contractor conspiracy. They'd order drinks and ask questions and take selfies. She smiled, poured drinks, told abbreviated versions of the story that left out the gunfight and focused on her grandfather's honor. But she kept the Glock 19 in her purse, parked under streetlights, varied her route home, checked her apartment before entering. Small precautions that might mean nothing or might save her life. 3 weeks after the congressional hearing, Jake called. We need to meet. Something's come up. They met at the same diner where this had all started. Boone was already there, looking worried. Jake slid into the booth with the kind of expression that meant bad news was coming. Kane's making moves. Not against us directly. He's smarter than that. But is going after the evidence itself. His lawyers filed a motion claiming the hard drive was obtained illegally. Fruit of the poisonous tree. They are arguing that everything derived from it should be inadmissible in any criminal proceedings. Can they do that? Tessa asked. They can try. The hard drive was on federal land. We didn't have a warrant or official authorization. Technically, we were trespassing. If a judge agrees with Kane's lawyers, the evidence gets thrown out. All of it. Everything your grandfather preserved becomes legally meaningless. Tessa felt her stomach drop. 20 years of documentation. 6 men dead. And it could all be thrown out on a technicality. Welcome to the justice system. It's not about truth. It's about procedure. And Kane's got the best lawyers money can buy. They're going to attack every single aspect of how we obtained that drive. Where we found it. How we accessed it. Who had custody. Every link in the chain. If they can break one link, the whole thing falls apart. So what do? We fight back. We get our own lawyers. We argue that the evidence was abandoned property, that we had legitimate reasons to believe it was relevant to unsolved crimes, that the public interest outweighs the technical violations. We hope the judge sees it our way. And if they don't, Jake's expression was grim. Then we start over. Find another way. Because this isn't just about legal justice anymore. It's about making sure people know what happened. Even if Kane never sees a jail cell, even if his company survives, we make sure the story is out there. That the men who died are remembered. That their sacrifice meant something. The legal battle dragged on for months. Motions and counter-motions. Briefs and arguments. Tessa's savings evaporated paying lawyers. Jake used his connections to find pro bono support from veteran advocacy groups. Boone leveraged his network of retired military officers to generate public pressure. They fought on every front. Legal, political, public relations. Meanwhile, life continued. Tessa poured drinks, trained at the shooting range, tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy. But it was exhausting. The constant vigilance, the waiting for the other shoe to drop, the knowledge that powerful people wanted her dead but couldn't act openly because of the dead man's switches. It was a Cold War. Both sides armed. Both sides watching. Neither side willing to fire first because the retaliation would be catastrophic. 6 months after the congressional hearing, the judge issued a ruling. Tessa sat in the courtroom, heart pounding, as the decision was read. The language was dense. Legal jargon. But the conclusion was clear. The evidence was admissible. The judge ruled that while the collection methods were irregular, the public interest in exposing systemic corruption outweighed the procedural concerns. The hard drive's contents could be used in criminal proceedings. Kane's lawyers immediately filed an appeal. But they'd lost this round. And in losing, they'd validated the evidence. Made it official. Not conspiracy theory. Not fabrication. Legally recognized documentation of criminal activity. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Microphones thrust forward. Questions shouted from every direction. Tessa, Jake, and Boone pushed through, saying nothing. Their lawyers had advised silence. Let the ruling speak for itself. But that night, in the relative safety of the safe house Jake maintained, they allowed themselves a moment of celebration. Boone opened a bottle of whiskey. The good stuff. The kind you save for significant occasions. To Ghost Blackwood, Boone said, raising his glass. Who knew this day would come even if he didn't live to see it? They drank. The whiskey burned going down. Good burn. Cleansing. This isn't over, Jake said after a moment. The appeal could take years. And even if it fails, prosecuting everyone involved will take longer. Some will flee. Others will cut deals. The architects might never face consequences. But we've won something, Tessa said. We've proven they can be touched. That money and power aren't absolute protection. That evidence matters. Truth matters. Even if justice is slow, even if it's incomplete, it's more than what we had 6 months ago. Your grandfather would be proud, Boone said quietly. You finished what he started. Took the shot he lined up. That's legacy. That's honor. Tessa thought about that. About legacy. About her grandfather spending 15 years protecting evidence he knew might not be used in his lifetime. About the patience required to work toward justice when you'd never see the result. About trusting that future generations would carry the weight forward. I want to do more, she said suddenly. Not just wait for courts and congressional investigations. I want to teach. Pass forward what he taught me. Not just shooting. The whole philosophy. Precision. Patience. Understanding that some targets take years to line up. That honor isn't about glory. It's about doing what's right even when nobody's watching. Jake smiled. Funny you should mention that. I made some calls. There's an instructor position opening at Quantico. Marine Corps Precision Shooting Program. They're looking for someone with practical experience and a story that inspires. Someone who understands that sniping isn't just about pulling triggers. It's about judgment, discipline, the willingness to carry weight. You think I'm qualified? You broke my 10-year record. You decoded a 15-year-old mystery. You exposed a criminal conspiracy that powerful people wanted buried. And you did it while staying alive and keeping your integrity intact. Yeah, I think you're qualified. The application process took 3 weeks. Background checks, interviews, demonstrations of skill and teaching ability. Tessa showed them what her grandfather had taught her. Not just the mathematics of long-range shooting, but the philosophy behind it. The ethical framework. The understanding that taking a life from distance still meant taking a life, and that required more than technical skill. It required wisdom. They offered her the position. Starting salary wasn't much. Government pay never was. But it came with purpose. With a chance to shape the next generation of precision shooters. To teach them what Ghost Blackwood had understood. That the hardest shots weren't about distance. They were about character. She accepted. Her first day at Quantico, she stood in front of 40 Marines. Young, eager, most of them barely out of their teens. They looked at her with curiosity and skepticism. She was young too. 28. Female. Not what they expected when they thought sniper instructor. My name is Tessa Blackwood, she began. Some of you might know that name. Might have seen the news coverage. I'm here to teach you precision shooting. But before we talk about rifles or ballistics or wind calculation, I need you to understand something fundamental. Sniping isn't about killing from distance. It's about accepting responsibility from distance. Every shot you take carries your name, your judgment, your decision that this target, at this moment, for these reasons, needed to be neutralized. You don't get to blame orders or circumstances or fog of war. You own it. Completely. Forever. She paused, letting that sink in. My grandfather was Colonel Declan Blackwood. They called him Ghost. He was one of the greatest snipers this country ever produced. Not because he had the most kills or the longest shots, though he had both. He was great because he understood that precision isn't just technical. It's moral. It's knowing when to shoot and when to wait, when to engage and when to walk away. He taught me that impossible is just a word people use when they don't understand the math. But he also taught me that just because you can make a shot doesn't mean you should. That's the difference between a shooter and a sniper. A shooter follows orders. A sniper makes judgments. Over the following weeks, she taught them everything. The technical skills, elevation calculations, wind reading, range estimation, breathing control, trigger discipline. But she also taught them the things her grandfather had taught her. The patience to wait hours for a single shot. The humility to acknowledge limitations. The courage to refuse an unethical order. The integrity to report honestly even when the truth was uncomfortable. Some of the Marines got it immediately. Others struggled. A few washed out, deciding that precision shooting wasn't their path. But the ones who stayed, the ones who embraced the full depth of what she was teaching, became exactly what her grandfather would have wanted. Thoughtful, skilled, dangerous when necessary, restrained always. 3 months into her tenure at Quantico, Jake visited. Brought news. Federal prosecutors have indicted 12 people, including 3 Vanguard Solutions executives. Charges include fraud, weapons trafficking, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. Kane isn't on the list yet, but they are building a case. Might take another year, but it's happening. What about the appeals? The motion to suppress evidence? Still pending. But even if they win that appeal, the public record exists. Congressional testimony, media coverage. Whistleblowers have come forward. People who worked for Vanguard and saw things. The dam broke. Information is flowing. You can't put it back. Tessa nodded. It wasn't the immediate justice she'd wanted. Wasn't her grandfather vindicated completely. But it was movement. Progress. The slow, grinding machinery of accountability finally engaging. There's something else, Jake said. Garrett's mother. My stepmother. She's still alive. I told her everything. About what really happened to Garrett. About the evidence. About what you did. She wanted me to give you this. He handed over an envelope. Tessa opened it. Inside was a photo. Young man in military uniform. Garrett Stone. Smiling. Alive. Behind it, a handwritten note. Thank you for giving me the truth. For 20 years, I believed my son died in an accident. Random. Meaningless. Now I know he died trying to stop something evil. That his death meant something. That he was murdered for doing the right thing. It doesn't make the pain less. But it makes it bearable. It gives his death purpose. You honored him by finishing what he started. I'll carry that with me for whatever time I have left. Thank you. Margaret Stone. Tessa felt tears prick her eyes. She hadn't thought about the families. About the mothers and fathers and siblings who'd lost people and never known why. About the difference between random tragedy and meaningful sacrifice. I need to meet her, Tessa said. Need to tell her about my grandfather. About how he never forgot Garrett and the others. How he protected their evidence for 15 years because he believed their sacrifice deserved justice. She'd like that. I'll arrange it. They met 2 weeks later. Margaret Stone was 74. Gray hair. Sad eyes that had probably been sad for 20 years. But when Tessa told her everything, when she explained how her grandfather had spent 15 years protecting the evidence, how he'd died rather than destroy it, how every decision he'd made had been to honor Garrett and the others, something shifted in those eyes. Not happiness. You couldn't be happy about your son being murdered. But peace. Understanding. The knowledge that his death had meant something beyond random bad luck. Garrett loved the army, Margaret said quietly. Loved serving. But he wouldn't have stayed silent about what he saw. That wasn't who he was. When they told me he died in an accident, part of me never believed it. A mother knows. But I didn't have proof. Didn't have anything except intuition. I spent 20 years wondering if I was crazy. If grief had made me paranoid. Thank you for showing me I wasn't. That my son died exactly how I thought he did. Fighting for something that mattered. They talked for hours. Tessa showed her photos of her grandfather. Told stories. explained the code system he'd used, the way he'd thought. Margaret listened, asked questions, and slowly assembled a picture of the man who'd spent his life trying to avenge her son. When they finally parted, Margaret hugged her. Held on tight. You have your grandfather's courage. His integrity. Don't waste it. The world needs people like you. People who won't look away. Who'll carry weight even when it's heavy. Promise me you'll keep being that person. I promise. The seasons changed. Fall turned to winter. Winter to spring. The legal proceedings continued. Some indictments led to plea deals. Others to trials. Vanguard Solutions declared bankruptcy. Assets seized to pay fines and restitution. Sterling Kane fought every charge, hiring the most expensive legal team in the country. But the evidence was overwhelming. The testimonies damning. Slowly, inevitably, his empire crumbled. Tessa taught her Marines. Watched them graduate. Sent them into the world as precision shooters who understood that their role was more than technical. She got letters sometimes from former students, thanking her, telling her about shots they'd taken or, more importantly, shots they'd refused to take. Decisions they'd made because they remembered her lessons about judgment and responsibility. Jake continued working. Private security. Consulting. But he also became an advocate for veterans' rights and defense contractor accountability. Testified before Congress. Wrote articles. Gave interviews. Used his reputation and connections to push for reform. He and Tessa stayed in touch. Not romantic. Just two people who'd been through something together and understood each other in ways most people never would. Boone retired fully. Bought a cabin in Montana. Fished. Read. Wrote a memoir about his time in the service. But he kept the dead man switch active. Kept watching the news. Kept being ready in case Kane or someone like him decided to make a move. 18 months after the congressional hearing, federal prosecutors finally indicted Sterling Kane. 37 counts. Fraud, conspiracy, money laundering, obstruction of justice, accessory to murder. The last charge was the hardest to prove. They couldn't definitively tie him to Ghost Blackwood's death or the others. But they had communication logs showing he knew about the evidence. Financial records showing payments to contractors with backgrounds in wet work. Testimony from low-level employees who'd seen things and been too scared to report them until now. The trial was scheduled for the following year. Kane's lawyers filed motion after motion, trying to delay, trying to get charges dismissed, trying to suppress evidence. But the judge was thorough, methodical, unwilling to let procedural games derail justice. Tessa followed the proceedings. Read the court documents. Watch the news coverage. But she didn't obsess. Didn't let it consume her life. She'd done her part. Decoded her grandfather's message. Retrieved the evidence. Made sure the truth was public. The rest was up to the system. Flawed as it was. Slow as it was. It was all they had. One evening, teaching a night class at Quantico, she had the Marines practice long-range calculations. Wind speed. Temperature. Elevation. All the variables that turned shooting from simple to complex. One of the students, a young corporal named Martinez, asked a question. Instructor Blackwood, how do you know when a shot is impossible? She thought about that. About the Barrett M107. About 2,400 yards. About breaking Jake Hawthorne's record. About everyone who'd said it couldn't be done. You don't, she said finally. Not for certain. There are shots that are improbable. That require perfect conditions and exceptional skill and a little bit of luck. But impossible is different. Impossible means the laws of physics won't allow it. And in my experience, physics is usually more generous than people think. The real question isn't whether a shot is possible. It's whether you've done the work to make it possible. Studied the variables. Trained the skills. Prepared the equipment. Built the knowledge base. Most people call something impossible because they haven't done the work, haven't put in the hours, haven't developed the expertise to recognize what's actually achievable. She paused, meeting each Marine's eyes in turn. My grandfather taught me that impossible shots become possible through preparation, through patience, through refusing to accept limitations other people impose. But he also taught me that just because a shot is possible doesn't mean it's wise. That judgment matters more than capability. That the hardest part of being a sniper isn't making difficult shots. It's knowing which shots to take and which to refuse. That's what separates professionals from amateurs. Amateurs shoot because they can. Professionals shoot because they should. Martinez nodded slowly. What about your shot? The one that broke the seal record. Was that wise? Tessa smiled. That shot wasn't about wisdom. It was about getting someone's attention. About proving I was serious. About demanding to be taken seriously by people who otherwise would have dismissed me. Sometimes you take a shot not because the target matters, but because the shot itself is a message. That's what that one was. A message to Jake Hawthorne that I knew what I was doing, that I'd earned the right to ask for his help. And it worked. Without that shot, without proving my capability, he never would have listened. Sometimes the target isn't downrange. It's sitting right behind you, watching to see if you're legitimate. The Marines absorbed that. The idea that shooting was communication, strategy, psychology, not just technical execution. The class ended. The Marines filed out. Tessa stayed behind, cleaning equipment, organizing the range. The night was clear, stars visible despite the ambient light from the base. She thought about her grandfather, about whether he'd approve of what she was doing, whether teaching was the right way to honor his legacy. She decided it was. He'd taught her. She was teaching others, knowledge and wisdom passing forward. The best parts of him surviving through her and through the Marines she trained. That was immortality, not fame or records or recognition, just the ideas and values continuing, influencing, shaping the future. Her phone buzzed. Text from Jake. Kane's trial date set. 9 months from now. Prosecution is confident. Thought you'd want to know. She texted back. Thanks. I'll be there. 9 months was a long time. A lot could happen. Kane could flee. The case could fall apart. Witnesses could recant or disappear. But Tessa had learned patience. Had learned that justice was a marathon, not a sprint. You did the work. You prepared the ground. You took the shots that needed taking. And then you waited for the results, trusting that if you'd done everything right, eventually the target would fall. She finished cleaning, locked up the range, and walked back to her quarters. The base was quiet. Most Marines asleep or off duty. She liked the stillness, the sense of purpose that came from being part of something larger than herself. Her grandfather had felt this, had walked bases like this one, had trained soldiers and passed forward knowledge. Now she was doing the same, carrying the torch, keeping the flame alive. In her quarters, she opened the safe where she kept her grandfather's journal. The original, not a copy, the actual notebook he'd written in. Pages filled with his handwriting, calculations, observations, philosophical musings. She read a passage he'd written 3 years before he died. Legacy isn't about monuments or awards. It's about what you pass forward. The knowledge, the values, the example. I'll die someday, probably sooner than I'd like. But if I've taught Tessa well, if she understands not just the technical skills but the moral framework, then I survive through her. Through her decisions, through her judgment. That's all any of us can hope for. To influence the future through the people we touch. To make the world slightly better because we were in it. To leave behind more than we took. Tessa closed the journal carefully. He'd known. Had known he was dying or might be killed. Had prepared her without telling her explicitly what she was being prepared for. Had trusted that when the time came, she'd understand. She'd decode the message. She'd finish the mission. And she had. The months passed. Training cycles completed. New Marines arrived. Graduated. Deployed. Tessa's reputation grew. The instructor who'd broken records and exposed conspiracies. The woman who taught that sniping was as much about philosophy as ballistics. Marines requested her classes specifically. Wanted to learn from her. Wanted the connection to Ghost Blackwood's legacy. She took it seriously. Never used her fame casually. Never let the story become more important than the lesson. Always brought it back to fundamentals. Discipline. Precision. Judgment. Honor. The unglamorous work that made excellence possible. 7 months after the trial date was set, Sterling Kane's lawyers made one final attempt. They approached Tessa through intermediaries. Offered a deal. $10 million. Tax-free. deposited in any account she specified. In exchange, she would testify that she'd fabricated portions of the evidence, that her grandfather had been paranoid and conspiracy-minded, that the hard drive had been altered. They weren't asking her to destroy the case entirely, just create enough doubt that a jury might acquit. Introduce reasonable uncertainty. She met with Jake and Boone to discuss it, not because she was considering accepting, but because she wanted them to know the offer had been made. Wanted transparency. Wanted them to understand what they were up against. 10 million, Boone said quietly. That's desperation. He knows the case is solid. Knows he's going to lose unless something dramatic changes. So he's trying to buy the one thing he can't fabricate, your testimony. What happens if I refuse? Tessa asked. Does he escalate? Try to eliminate me despite the dead man's switchies? Possible, Jake said, but unlikely. The trial is too close. Too much scrutiny. Any move against you now would be obvious. Would confirm his guilt in the public eye even if they couldn't prove it in court. He's trapped. Best case scenario for him is you take the money and give him an opening. Worst case is you refuse and he goes to prison. There's no scenario where killing you helps him. So I refuse. You refuse. Jake agreed. And we document everything. Record the offer. Report it to prosecutors. Because attempting to tamper with a witness is itself a crime. He just handed us another charge. Tessa made the call herself. Put it on speaker so Jake and Boone could witness. Told the intermediary no. Not for 10 million. Not for 100 million. Not for anything. Her grandfather had died protecting the truth. She wouldn't dishonor his memory by selling it. The intermediary tried to negotiate. Raised the offer to 15 million. Then 20. Tessa hung up. Blocked the number, filed a report with the prosecutors. They added witness tampering to the indictment. 2 months before the trial, Tessa received an unexpected visitor. A woman, mid-40s, professional attire. Introduced herself as Catherine Voss, investigative journalist. She'd been covering the Vanguard Solutions story from the beginning. Had written extensively about defense contractor corruption. Wanted to interview Tessa for a long-form piece. They met at a coffee shop. Catherine had done her homework. Knew details about Ghost Blackwood's career that even Tessa hadn't known. Had tracked down other members of his unit. Had built a comprehensive picture of who he'd been and what he'd accomplished. Your grandfather was remarkable, Catherine said. Not just as a soldier, as a human being. Everyone I talked to said the same thing. He had integrity. Couldn't be bought. Couldn't be intimidated. When he saw something wrong, he acted. Even when it cost him. Especially when it cost him. That's rare. Most people compromise. Find reasons to look away. He never did. Is that your article's angle? Hagiography of a dead soldier? No. My angle is that one man with evidence and conviction can challenge systemic corruption. That power isn't absolute. That accountability is possible if people are willing to pay the price for it. Your grandfather paid that price. You're still paying it. I want readers to understand what that means. The sacrifice, the persistence, the refusal to quit even when every incentive is to walk away. They talked for 3 hours. Tessa told stories, showed photos, explained her grandfather's philosophy and teaching methods. Catherine took notes, asked intelligent questions, pushed on details. By the end, Tessa felt like she'd been thoroughly interrogated, but in a good way. Catherine was serious, professional, committed to accuracy. When does the article publish? Tessa asked. 2 weeks before the trial. Maximum impact. I want people to understand who Ghost Blackwood was before they hear prosecutors talk about him. Want the jury pool to see him as a person, not just a name in court documents. Is that okay? It's perfect. The article ran in a major magazine. 8,000 words. Photos. Interviews with former unit members. A deep dive into Ghost Blackwood's career and the events leading to his death. It was fair, balanced. Didn't sugarcoat his flaws or turn him into a saint. But it showed his courage, his integrity, his commitment to doing what was right even when it was hard. The public response was overwhelming. Social media exploded. Veterans groups shared it widely. Congressional representatives referenced it in speeches. Ghost Blackwood became a symbol, not just of sniping excellence, but of moral courage. of refusing to be complicit in evil. And Sterling Kane became the villain. The billionaire who'd sent men to die while profiting from their sacrifice. Who'd covered up evidence and eliminated witnesses. Who'd spent decades building wealth on blood and corruption. Public opinion crystallized. Before the trial even started, he'd already been convicted in the court of public sentiment. The trial began on a Monday morning in federal court. Tessa sat in the gallery with Jake, Boone, and Margaret Stone. The courtroom was packed. Media everywhere. The prosecution's case was methodical. Document after document. Witness after witness. Building an overwhelming picture of systematic fraud and criminal conspiracy. Kane's defense strategy was to attack the evidence chain. Question how the hard drive was obtained. Suggest it had been tampered with. Claim that Ghost Blackwood had been mentally unstable. That the whole thing was a conspiracy theory by disgruntled former employees and vengeful family members. But the jury wasn't buying it. You could see it in their faces. The skepticism when Kane's lawyers made their arguments. The attention when prosecutors presented evidence. The emotional reactions when photos of Garrett Stone and the others were shown. When their service records were read. When their families testified about the official stories they'd been told and the suspicions they'd harbored. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Testimony from 73 witnesses. Over 3,000 exhibits. The prosecution was thorough. Almost excessive. But they were making sure every possible angle was covered. Every defense avenue closed off. Finally, closing arguments. The prosecutor, a woman named Rebecca Kim, stood before the jury. She didn't shout, didn't theatricalize, just spoke calmly, factually, walking through the evidence piece by piece. This case is about greed, she said. About a man who saw war not as tragedy but as business opportunity. Who prolonged conflict because peace meant losing contracts. Who sold weapons to enemies because profit mattered more than American lives. And when good men discovered his crimes, when they documented his corruption, he systematically eliminated them. Made their deaths look like accidents. Intimidated investigators. Buried evidence. For 20 years, he got away with it. But he couldn't account for one thing. She paused. He couldn't account for Colonel Declan Blackwood's granddaughter. A woman who refused to accept the official story. Who spent years decoding her grandfather's message. Who risked everything to recover evidence he'd protected with his life. Who broke a Navy SEAL shooting record just to get taken seriously. That's the human element Sterling Kane didn't calculate. The persistence. The courage. The refusal to let evil win by default. Rebecca looked at the jury. You have the evidence. You have the testimony. You have the truth. Now you have a decision. Do we live in a country where billionaires can murder witnesses and buy impunity? Or do we live in a country where justice eventually reaches everyone? Where corruption has consequences? Where good men who die protecting the truth are vindicated? That's what you're deciding. Not just Sterling Kane's guilt, but what kind of nation we are. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they returned, every face was grave. Serious. The 4 persons stood. On count 1, fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On count 2, conspiracy, we find the defendant guilty. On count 3, money laundering, we find the defendant guilty. 37 counts. 37 guilty verdicts. Sterling Kane stood motionless as each one was read. His expression never changed. But his hands, clasped in front of him, tightened until the knuckles went white. Sentencing was scheduled for 2 months later. Kane faced up to 240 years in federal prison. Even with concurrent sentences and good behavior, he'd die behind bars. His empire was destroyed. His fortune largely seized. His name synonymous with corruption. Outside the courthouse, media surrounded Tessa. She'd prepared a statement. Today, justice was served. Not just for Sterling Kane's crimes, but for 6 men who died trying to expose them. Garrett Stone, Marcus Webb, Travis York, Ryan Cross, Declan Blackwood, and Boone Collier, who survived to see this day. They were soldiers. They were patriots. And when they saw something wrong, they acted. They documented corruption. They tried to report it through proper channels. And for their integrity, they were murdered. Today's verdict doesn't bring them back. Doesn't undo the pain their families endured. But it proves they were right. That their sacrifice meant something. That corruption can be exposed and punished. That's their legacy. That's what we honor today. She refused further questions. Walked away with Jake and Boone flanking her. Margaret Stone followed. They went to a quiet restaurant. Sat in a private room. Ordered food nobody really ate. Your grandfather would be proud, Boone said finally. Not just of the verdict. Of you. Who you've become. What you've built. He knew you'd be special. Knew you had the capability. But I don't think even he imagined you'd take it this far. I just did what he taught me, Tessa said. Lined up the shot. Waited for the perfect conditions. Took my time. Trusted the process. You did more than that. You created meaning from tragedy. Turned grief into purpose. That's rare. Most people get stuck. Get bitter. You got active. Got precise. Made every move count. Margaret Stone reached across the table, took Tessa's hand. Garrett can rest now. They all can. Thank you for that. Thank you for refusing to let their deaths be meaningless. They talked late into the night. Stories about the men who died. About missions and moments. About the kind of courage it took to stand against corruption when everyone else was looking away. It wasn't celebration exactly. More like remembrance. Honoring. Acknowledging. Sentencing day arrived. Kane received 180 years. No possibility of parole. He was 72 years old. He'd die in prison. The judge, during sentencing, was unsparing. Mr. Kane, you betrayed every principle this nation stands for. You prolonged war for profit. You armed enemies. You murdered witnesses. And when finally brought to account, you showed no remorse. No recognition of wrongdoing. Only entitlement and contempt. You've earned every year of this sentence. I only regret that I cannot impose more. Kane was led away in handcuffs. Tessa watched him go. Felt no triumph. No satisfaction. Just exhaustion. It was over. Finally. 5 years of searching. 18 months of legal battles. All of it ending with an old man shuffling toward a prison cell. But it wasn't really about him. It had never been about him. It was about the men who died. About making sure their sacrifice mattered. About proving that truth could prevail if someone cared enough to fight for it. She went back to Quantico. Back to teaching. The Marines in her classes were aware of the verdict. Some asked questions. She answered briefly. Kept the focus on lessons, not personal drama. What mattered was what they learned. How they grew. The kind of snipers they'd become. 6 months later, she received a package. No return address. She opened it carefully, aware that threats still existed. Inside was a challenge coin. Custom-made. On one side, Ghost Blackwood's face. On the other, the words Legacy of Precision. With it, a note. Handwritten. Jake's writing. From the Marines you've trained. They took up a collection. Had this made. Wanted you to know what you've built. You're not just teaching them to shoot. You're teaching them to think. To decide. To be more than tools. Ghost would be proud. I'm proud. Keep doing what you're doing. The world needs more people like you. Jake. She held the coin. Felt its weight. Real and symbolic. This was legacy. Not headlines or trials of verdicts. This. Teaching. Passing forward. Building the future one Marine at a time. She put the coin on her desk, where she could see it every day. A reminder of why she did this. Who she did it for. What mattered. Years would pass. More Marines would train under her. More snipers would learn not just to shoot, but to think. To question. To maintain integrity under pressure. Some would deploy. Some would take shots in combat. Some would refuse shots that looked legitimate but weren't. And they'd make those decisions because Tessa Blackwood had taught them that precision wasn't just about hitting targets. It was about hitting the right targets for the right reasons. Ghost Blackwood's legacy would live on. Not in headlines. Not in history books. But in the quiet decisions of Marines who understood that skill without judgment was dangerous. That capability without conscience was corruption. That the hardest shots weren't about distance. They were about character. And Tessa would continue teaching. Year after year. Class after class. Passing forward the lessons her grandfather had died protecting. Making sure his sacrifice meant more than a moment. Making it eternal. Because that's what legacy really was. Not fame. Not recognition. just the quiet continuation of values through people who understood their importance. The patient work of building a better future through better practitioners. Her grandfather had taught her that impossible was just math people hadn't done yet. Now she taught others, and they'd teach more, and the truth would continue spreading. One shot, one student, one decision at a time. Precision, patience, purpose. The Blackwood legacy lived on. The extended ending began on an ordinary Tuesday morning at Quantico. Tessa stood at the edge of the range, coffee in hand, watching dawn break over the Virginia hills. The air was crisp. October, the kind of morning her grandfather had loved. She'd been teaching for 3 years now, had trained over 200 Marines. Some had written back from deployment. Others had simply disappeared into the machine of military savers, carrying lessons she'd never know if they remembered. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost ignored it, but something made her answer. Tessa Blackwood. The voice was elderly, male, unfamiliar. Speaking. My name is David Webb. Marcus Webb was my son. She went still. Marcus Webb, one of the 6, killed in 2004. Official story, friendly fire. I'm listening. I read about the trial, about what you did, about the evidence your grandfather protected. His voice cracked slightly. For 16 years, I believe my son died because of a mistake. A tragic accident in combat. I was angry, but I accepted it. What else could I do? Then your grandfather's story came out, and I learned the truth. My son was murdered, executed because he tried to stop criminals. Mr. Webb, I'm so sorry. Don't apologize. You gave me something I thought I'd never have. Truth, closure, understanding. He paused. I'm 84 years old. Don't have much time left. But before I go, I wanted to tell you something. My son used to talk about honor, about doing what was right even when it cost you. I didn't always understand what he meant. Seemed abstract, philosophical. But watching what you did, how you fought for years to expose the truth, how you refused to quit or compromise, I finally understand. That's what he was talking about. That's what he believed in. And that's what got him killed. Tessa's throat tightened. He died a hero, Mr. Webb. They all did. I know that now. Thanks to you. I'm calling because I wanted you to hear it from me. Not a letter. Not a message. I wanted you to hear my voice when I said this. Thank you. For honoring my son. For making his death mean something. For showing that integrity still matters in this world. They talked for 30 minutes. She told him what she knew about Marcus. About the mission. About her grandfather's notes describing Marcus as the moral compass of the team. David Webb cried. So did Tessa. When the call ended, she sat in silence, watching the sun fully crest the hills. Legacy wasn't just about the student she trained. It was about every family member who could finally sleep at night knowing their loved one hadn't died for nothing. Every veteran who saw that speaking truth to power was worth the cost. Every young person who learned that impossible was just another word for difficult. Her grandfather had taught her to shoot. But more importantly, he taught her that some shots take a lifetime to line up. That justice moved slowly but could arrive if you refused to give up. That honor was measured not in moments, but in decades of persistence. She finished her coffee. Marines were arriving for morning training. Time to teach. Time to pass it forward. Time to make sure Ghost Blackwood's lessons echoed into a future he'd never see but had helped build. The range came alive with voices. Young, eager, ready to learn. Tessa smiled. Her grandfather would have loved this. Would have stood right here, teaching these same lessons, preparing these same warriors. Now she did it for him. And someday, one of these Marines would do it for her. The chain unbroken. The legacy eternal. She picked up her rifle, checked the wind, called the first student forward. Another day, another lesson, another shot lined up perfectly.